Welcome back to The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. My name is Sonny Bunch. I'm culture editor at The Bulwark, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Arthur Smith. Now, Arthur Smith is the author of the new book, Reach, Hard Lessons and Learn Truths from a Lifetime in Television. And I'm really excited to have Mr. Smith on today because he has been at the forefront of a real revolution in television over these last decades now. I mean, you have a real storied career here, starting at the CBC, working on up through I don't know, network TV in the States, the introduction of Fox Sports Net, all sorts of stuff. But then, of course, the founding of your company, A. Smith and Co., which I recognize. It's funny. When I started reading the book, I was like, I recognize that label from many things. Kitchen Nightmares is the big one for me because I'm a huge Gordon Ramsay fan. But also all sorts of stuff. American Ninja Warrior, which just had its 15th season, start this Monday. Where it's out there. People can check that out. But I'm rambling here. I'm talking more than I like to, just because I'm so excited. Mr. Smith, thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure, Sonny, and I'm looking forward to this.
So, as I said, you were really at the forefront of a real revolution in television production. But you start your book in an interesting way, which is to say that you don't like how that revolution is often described. Can you explain to folks why you don't like the term reality TV?
Well, I think when people talk about reality TV, I think they all define it differently, depending on the person. So often when people think of reality television, they often think of the trashiest form of reality television that's out there and not about the mainstream television that's out there. And so for me, if I had to define reality television, I would define it in two genres or two subgenres, really, I should say. One being the unstructured reality television, which the Real World was the pioneer and started, and which became Real Housewives, which became the Kardashians, which are the docu-soaps or the docu-follows. And then the other category would be the structured reality, and that would be the formatted shows like Mark Burnett's Survivor, which led to Hell's Kitchen and The Apprentice. But I feel like there's a whole bunch of programming that I don't really classify as reality television. And the best term that I can come up with is nonfiction television. And that to me is shows like American Idol, which is not really a reality show. It's a variety show. And, people can refer to Let's Make a Deal or No Deal, I should say, as a reality show. It's a game show. Game shows have been around for 50 years. Let's give game shows respect. Let's give that genre respect. So, so I think within reality television, I really think there's the real world tree, basically. And then I think there's a survivor tree, and then things that flow out from that. And everything else to me belongs in the genres in which they were designed, whether it's a sports entertainment show like American Ninja Warrior, whether it's a music series or variety series like American Idol, or whether it's a game show. Just call things for what they are. So, but it's really funny because over the years, there is some negativity to the word reality television because when it first started, it had this connotation. And yes, there still exists trashiest reality television, but I get concerned when people lump it all in one way. And a lot of times people will say, "Oh, I don't watch reality television," and then I'll start to list Shark Tank and The Voice and all these things that have now become part of the genre. And they go, "Oh, I watched that," and I go, "Okay." And then sometimes people call it alternative television, and that's not it either, because hey, let's look at the top 10 shows on television. They're not alternative; they're mainstream television. So that's why I get I've learned to not like the term reality television. And by the way, if you look at executives' business cards at NBC, ABC, Fox, Netflix, none of them are the vice president of reality television. Mm-hmm. They're all vice president of unscripted programming, vice president of alternative programming, vice president of nonfiction. So even they don't like it. So let's just go for. But it's fine. It's fine. I accept it. My name has been associated with reality television. I'm proud of it. But I got to tell you, I know I'm rambling, but I got to tell you, the interesting thing was that before I started my company 23 years ago, I was at Fox Sports. I had a great job at Fox Sports. Now I've been a sports guy. I've been an entertainment guy. I got started very young as a producer in sports, and somehow, which is all written in the book Reach, that's coming out, or that's already out. It's been out for about a week now. But that sorry, lost my train of thought. I went back to Canada for a second. So when I was, somehow I became head of CBC Sports when I was quite young. I was in my 20s, and Dick Clark had moved me to LA, and that's a whole other story. Got me my green card, and then eventually I made my way back into sports. Not intentionally; it was just the way my life worked out. I actually moved to LA, never thinking I'd work in sports again. But anyway, I went back to sports, and I was at Fox Sports. And I got to a point where I was missing the entertainment side and missing the variety side. And I knew one day I wanted to start up my own company because I love everything. I love television so much. And I had this long-term deal at Fox Sports. And I took the biggest reach of my life and started my production company. And I had, a wife and 2 young daughters. And I had this great job at Fox Sports that paid very well, and I had security and everything else, and I left for my dream really with no income or nothing on the horizon. And at that time, the year 2000, there wasn't much reality television on, or what is now called reality television. So I went to set up a company that was going to be a nonfiction company that was going to be everything that I had done, which was variety shows, award shows, music shows, clip shows, what would have been referred to as light entertainment shows. I mean, I was doing a show called When Stars Were Kids at Dick Clark long before people called it reality television. I suppose they would call it now. So my timing turned out to be pretty good. I was kind of lucky because a year and a half into my company, I was doing my first big primetime network series was Paradise Hotel, which was a big win for Fox in the summer of 2000 and 2003. Maybe a little bit ahead of its time because it was so sexy that the advertisers wouldn't buy in, and it didn't come back for a second season. And of course, Love Island and Bachelor in Paradise. I mean, very similar to Paradise Hotel. I'm just saying it's very similar. So anyhow, we were ahead of our time, but we had a great run that summer, and it really started a long, still going business with Fox. Fox has always been one of our big clients, but we work for everybody. We work for 50 networks, so I love my friends at all the networks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, American Ninja Warrior, of course, is on NBC. And there's actually a great story in your book about how that show started. Started at, kind of a smaller cable network, G4, which is kind of struggling. They had the show that a lot of people for them were watching, but they weren't entirely sure what to do with. And 15 years later, it's, a cornerstone of the NBC lineup, still the primetime lineup.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy when I think back and I mean, I was happy to have a single, like not a home run with G4. And you're right. At the time, one of my colleagues from Fox Sports, former colleagues from Fox Sports, Neil Tiles, was running G4. And he had this show called Sasuke from Japan, which was the only thing really getting a rating on his network. And he called me and he goes, maybe there's an American version of it. And I said, let me see the tape. And I watched it. And what got me right away was the people who ran the course were plumbers, dental hygienists, teachers, and they usually failed. And it was a celebration of the attempt. And when I saw that, I thought of like my years doing Olympic Games. I did 3 Olympic Games and all the, those profiles, the up and close profiles that you do when you're doing Olympics, where you get vested in people's story and then you watch them in a sport that you only watch every 4 years. And I said, if we can make people care about the people who run this course, then I think we have something. Never, ever thinking that we were going to end up on NBC. I mean, that was not what I was saying. How could I even think about it? I had to deal with G4. The only reason it happened that it ended up on NBC was luck. Comcast, which owned G4E, bought NBC Universal, and Neil and I, went to NBC and said, "Hey, would you mind? Could you just put on our finale as an act of synergy to throw a spotlight on the show on G4?" Never ever thinking that we'd end up on NBC. Why would we think that? So I knew we had a good show. I knew the reach was more than just G4 viewers, but it's a G4 show. But the show did so well that NBC called and said, "Hey, maybe we should do some more." As it turned out, it was on a night that Hell's Kitchen was on. So we had Hell's Kitchen on Fox and Ninja Warrior on NBC, and Hell's Kitchen ran 8 to 10, and Ninja ran 9 to 11. And I wasn't worried about Hell's because Hell's was already one of the highest rated shows. And so Hell's won the 8 o'clock hour. Ninja came in second to Hell's at the 9 o'clock hour. But Ninja won the 10 o'clock hour when it was on, not against Hell's Kitchen. And Paul Talegdi, who was running NBC, the unscripted division, I got to choose my words carefully now all that I've said. And he said, "Mr. Monday Night, you just won every time period." And I said, "Oh." And I said, "So Ninja did well?" He goes, "Yeah, no, it did really well." He goes, "Maybe we should do more." And Paul had the foresight to see that there was something more, that this was really a broader show. And then we did more, and then eventually NBC took it. But had Comcast not bought NBC Universal, this would have never happened. And if we would have pitched an obstacle course show to NBC, I don't know. I don't think they would have bought it. But
an obstacle course show where most people fail, as you say. I mean, yes. That's one of the fascinating things about American Ninja Warrior is that it's a show that you just watch people try, and most of them don't make it, and that's fine. People are still very excited and into it. So when you're looking at a show like this, Hell's Kitchen has a winner at the end of the year. Hell's Kitchen, it's a elimination competition show. At the end of the year, there's a winner. At the end of each night, there's a winner. There's, somebody wins in the kitchen, somebody loses, and somebody gets sent home. And it's a pretty straightforward competition show. But when you were like sitting down and thinking, okay, how do we make something like this that appeals to, that's going to appeal to the broadest swath of people possible? What are you looking for from just a producer standpoint? What are you thinking and sitting here and saying, well, it needs this element. This doesn't necessarily work. This is what we're looking for.
Well, all through my life, and maybe it's because I'm surrounded by women. I have 2 daughters. I grew up with 2 older sisters. I'm a very sensitive person. So I always like television that makes me feel something. When I was doing sports, I was always I love doing the game. I'm a big sports fan. But I really like more the storylines. And I like really more the setup. And the openings and the packages we did about the athletes. And so I'm always after television that makes you feel something. And as Ninja has proven out, you don't need a winner. You just need to care. You need to care about these people. So much energy goes into those packages and those pieces that Saturday Night Live has made fun of. God bless them. I appreciate it. I believe that the charm of Ninja is that we do celebrate the attempt, and it's the only athletic competition that I know where the athletes root for each other. It's very anti-American. It's the only athletic competition where there is no winner. It's the only athletic competition where men and women compete on the same obstacle course. It's not changed for the women, and I love all that. And I think it's there's a ton of positive messaging. And it's become a broad family show. I hear this all the time from people that it is the show I sit down and watch with my family. And ninjas come in all shapes and sizes and colors and genders. And I mean, it's for everybody. And most people aren't going to be a quarterback in the Super Bowl or sink a putt at the Masters, but Ninja is the show for everybody. And yes, we do have our elite ninjas who are amazing and phenomenal, and it's incredible how good they got. The other interesting thing that's happened with Ninja, this is like, who could see this one coming, is that it's a sport now. It's an actual sport that kids now say, I'm not playing soccer, I'm doing Ninja. And that's kind of crazy. And there's Ninja gyms all over the country, and there's Ninja birthday parties. And et cetera, et cetera. So this was a little show from Japan. And by the way, when we took it over, the Japanese rights holder, they like us a lot because we took their little show, and now the American show is seen in 100 countries, and there's 20 or so local versions of Ninja Warrior UK, Ninja Warrior Australia, and stuff like that. But it's been such a pleasure. And for me, who's a guy who couldn't make up his mind whether you want to work in sports or entertainment, I get to do both in this one show. And that's amazing.
You mentioned the rights holder, the original rights holder in Japan, and I'd like to talk a little bit about this. Again, this is it's a Business of Hollywood show, and I want to help people understand how this works. So with a show like American Ninja Warrior, there was an original Japanese version, or I believe American Idol, same kind of thing, right? There was
Pop
a British Pop Idol show, or Kitchen Nightmares, which actually had a very different form. When it showed in England. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how that works, just how the finances of that works, and I'm going to lead into this, but and how this kind of led you to kind of want to develop your own show that could then be sold around the world in similar fashion, because the $1 billion hit is the show that you can sell to 100 countries.
Correct.
I'm sure you guys do okay on American Ninja Warrior for producers' fees and all that, but it is the real pot of gold is creating the syndicated worldwide thing.
Sure. So listen, it's funny, when I first came to America 30 something years ago, and I was coming from Canada, it was a little bit like coming from Mars, like from another planet. Because at the time, American buyers were really only focused on things that were happening in the US, developed by American producers. And then along came Survivor, which was based on foreign format, and Big Brother, and a number of other things, Hell's Kitchen, which was based on another completely different show, but based on one. And they saw the power in these formats, that things that did well in the Netherlands or Israel or somewhere else, or Pop Idol for the UK example, could do well in the United States. And so it actually, in some ways, there was a period of time where people were only buying formats from international. It was like, what? We can't create something in America? But that's changed. Now I think we're this global village now where ideas get exchanged and it's all good, and everybody can be created here and sold there and vice versa, and it happens that way. So for us, when Neil, going back to Ninja Warrior, what happened was yes, there was a Japanese rights holder, but we welcome the challenge. And as producers, sometimes you own things and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you make a deal to own part of it, what we call back-end rights, and you split it with them. So there's, depending on what the project is, depending on the success of it, depending on the timing, the network, et cetera, there is a negotiation that goes on. Of course, it's much better if you own everything. So, but I'm in the business of producing hits. I'm in the producing of that's what I'm all about. So I'm good with wherever it comes from, as long as I feel confident that I can make it a hit. And the first time I saw Ninja Warrior, I said, there's something here. So I really believed it right away. I never anticipated it, like I said, being a network series, but I did see something special about the show, and I was excited about doing it. Not necessarily the same thing happened when I heard of Gordon Ramsay and Hell's Kitchen, because I was not a foodie, and at the time in 2004. 2004, food in America was in a much different place than it is today. We've evolved. We have definitely evolved as a nation in terms of what our tastes are and what we eat, and our acceptance of other cuisines. And we become a nation of foodies. And social media has a lot to do with that as well. So the first time I had heard Mike Darnell at Fox, who was running the alternative reality, unscripted nonfiction, I'm going to use every word, at Fox, said to me, he called me And he said, there's this guy in the UK, his name is Gordon Ramsay. I said, who's that? He's a chef. Oh, okay. He's a Michelin star chef. Uh-huh. And anyhow, he does the show called Hell's Kitchen in the UK. And I'm not sure about the show, but you should watch the tape. And I go, Mike, it's a food show on network television. It doesn't work. Mark Burnett tried the restaurant, had a couple of seasons. There's never really been a successful broadcast network food show. I said, my knee-jerk reaction is, I don't get it. But Mike Darnell was a good buyer, and like I said, if he would have asked me to watch a fire log burning, I would watch it just because he was Mike, and I would do anything for him. And anyhow, I watched the tape, and I immediately was mesmerized by Gordon. I did not like the show. It was a show with celebrities. It was a very different show than what we did, and it was 2 days live and live to tape, and it was slow. But I liked the title, and I liked Gordon. And I went to Mike and I said, I like the title, like Gordon. I said, if we do this, we have to make it broad and we have to make something aspirational. And, and then I went on with this thing and I said, we're going to have two kitchens and two teams. And, Gordon will be the taskmaster and we'll introduce Gordon to American audiences and et cetera, et cetera. And I began to describe what is now Hell's Kitchen. And Mike was amazing and supportive and everything else like that. And we built a restaurant. It's crazy. We built a restaurant. And we shot this thing, and I was making a show for me because I wanted to make sure that it reached a broad audience. And you don't have to, sometimes people say, oh, I love your food show, and I go, it's not really yes, it's a food show, but it's not really a food show. It's a show about aspirations, about people living their dream, about working with the greatest person in that field, the GOAT of cooking. And how they work for it, and and how admirable they are, and I said so you don't really have to be a foodie to enjoy the show. Now, foodies will enjoy the show, but you don't have to be. And then we finished the show, and the show at the time was so different than anything else. It sat on the shelf for 6 months. Fox had it on the shelf for 6 months, and they were very nervous. It was funny. We were talking about the evolution of the genre, but around 2004, 2005, it was the beginning of a lot of failures in the genre. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because at the first, there was this whole novelty to the genre. But around 2004, 2005, and Mike, who was like a hit maker, he also had a couple of misses, which was very rare for Mike. But everybody was missing. And then all of a sudden, here we go. The genre is dead. This reality thing is a fad. It's over. And so Fox was very nervous about Gordon and the show because there had never been anyone like Gordon on television, and there had never been a show like this on television. And so it sat there, and I was like, put it on. I know it's good. And then eventually they said, okay, and we're putting you on next Monday or whatever, a few Mondays from now, whatever it was. And it was Memorial Day. I said, oh, thank you for that. Thank you for the long Monday launch. And that's you're really giving me a great start. Anyhow, the show did really well in spite of being Monday, and then didn't lose a time period for, 4 seasons. It never did. And in its third season was the number one show of all shows on television. Hell's Kitchen at the time was ahead of America's Got Talent. And sometimes you have to be convinced. But, it's funny. We just talked about American Ninja Warrior and Hell's Kitchen. Both of those were reaches. Going back to the book, both of those were reaches. They were like, at the time, the whole ninja story is a reach, and Hell's was a reach. And in terms of, the timing and everything else like that. And it's funny when I think of, we were talking about the evolution of food, when I think about shows like Hell's Kitchen, which is, we've produced our 22nd season. Its 22nd season hasn't aired yet. It'll air soon on Fox. And Top Chef, which 20 seasons of Top Chef, and everything that's going on in social media, all these components, I think, are contributors to what has happened to food in this country. And so it's nice to see. And by the way, I'm a foodie now. I am a foodie now.
You write in your book about how Gordon Ramsay was a little bit skeptical of you at first. He was not sold on you necessarily as the guy to make this show.
No, No, he. There was a point when I was talking and rambling like I'm doing now, and telling him about all the things that I thought the show would be, and he just looked at me and he says, "You," in Gordon's charming way. I'll leave out a few f bombs. He just said, "You know absolutely nothing about food, right?" And I go, what do you say to that?" And I just said, "I do know something about making television, and you're going to teach me, and we're going to work together." And he's so great. He gave me a high five right after that. But it was just part of Gordon's charm. Like he'll challenge you. I mean, he challenges you. He's a perfectionist. He's an amazing, amazing human being. And we sat down, and I said to him, whatever we do is going to be purposeful. We're not, yes, I'm a showman, but I'm not going to do anything that doesn't, fall into the criteria of what a great chef would be. So I said, let's just talk it out. Let's go through it. And we literally sat there and said, what makes a great chef? And you go, leadership, creativity, palate. And we listened. I said, I guarantee you every challenge. There may be a little show before we get to the challenge, but once we get to the challenge, it's going to be testing that. And we may do the challenge in an interesting way, but it will test those things. And it's a real, when you're on the set of Hell's Kitchen, it's a real restaurant. The cameras, it's our Truman Show. We have 80 cameras, 73 robotic, 7 handheld. The producers are never seen. It's really Gordon in this world with these chefs, and that way, I wanted the most authentic competition that we could possibly have. And the chefs who come there, it's funny how I talked about Ninja, how it evolved into the real world, and with Hell's, chefs have it on their resume that they were on Hell's Kitchen season 7 or season 9. It is school. We don't show as much of the training that actually happens. It's not a miracle that they get better. They get better because there are times when Gordon will come to me and he goes, "Hey, you gotta leave us alone for 4 hours. We're working today training." I said, "Okay, we're following you," and he wants them to get better. His intentions are, even though it's a television show, Gordon is still the same person. He's still this great chef who wants other people to raise their game, and he's great at it.
Well, I mean, Hell's Kitchen in particular feels like, it feels almost like the TV version of your concept of reaching, right? Like you have a bunch of people who, if we're being totally honest, probably don't deserve to be in the kitchen with Gordon Ramsay, at least when they start. Like they're not completely inexperienced, but they're also, not necessarily Michelin starred chefs.
Yeah.
And through the show, they learn, they get better. They create opportunities for themselves and everybody else. Which leads me to I feel bad because I haven't actually asked you to talk about your book here as much as I should have. I'm asking you to tell stories from your book, but your book is about this idea of taking a taking a chance on yourself and reaching for something better. Tell folks about your book and kind of why you wanted to write it to let folks know how to better their situations.
Well, I have been thinking about writing this book for some time, but I've been busy. So but there was, I suppose I was kind of subconsciously writing it for 4 or 5 years, because when I sat down to write it, I couldn't stop. And the first weekend, I wrote 85 pages in a weekend, and I slept 2 hours over a Saturday night. My wife thought I was out of my mind. I came out of Sunday night. I walked out of the room with my hair standing up and with this crazed look on my face, unshaven. And what is wrong with you? And I started to read, and she goes, "What is this?" And I go, "I think it's a book." And then,
as a writer, we've all been there. I can assure you that's a regular face that our wives or spouses see.
Yeah, you know the look. You know that look. So and I realized that listen, I wanted to write a book that did some good, that had some positive messaging. And so I say that it's a memoir with a purpose. And the purpose is to show the power of reach. When you reach, you find out what you're capable of. When you reach, you learn the difference between a pipe dream and what you haven't dared to try just yet. And I believe we make our good fortune. I believe that we have to put ourselves out there. Now, you can get lucky, and things can happen to you, but I think you need to step forward. Everything that's ever happened to me most of the things that happened to me, I should be careful. Most of the things that happened to me is because I put my neck out, I stepped forward. My first break at CBC Sports was because I did something really ignorant. The story you read about in the book, but I did something really ignorant that turned out to be something by stalking an executive, which you shouldn't do. You should never do that. but I didn't know any better, and I did. But I was reaching. When I produced the Olympics at 24, I was reaching. When I became head of CBC Sports, all the things that have happened to me, and moving to LA to work with Dick Clark, I'd spent all my life in sports, and I was going to go produce entertainment shows and award shows. I was reaching again. I've talked about the reach from Fox Sports when I had a secure job, but I knew I wanted to do other things. And, I was just hoping to make a living because I was, starting a company with no income in sight. So, and it all started for me when I was quite young. And I'm grateful that I had this moment. I didn't know what that moment was until I started writing the book. And I realized that something happened to me when I was very young, 9 years old, that something happened to me that changed my life. It subconsciously taught me that when I put myself out there, I at least put myself, gave myself a chance to accomplish something and have success. And I would have never known that in that particular situation. I was forced to go. I was forced to put myself out there. So from that thing on, and the readers will have to read that story. We're going to tease something. We're not going to do the whole book.
Okay.
But it changed the course of my life, and then I became this person. I grew up as the shyest. Hard to believe, Sonny. I know because I haven't shut up. But I grew up as the shyest kid, like extremely shy. And my parents were actually worried about me. And we moved from one neighborhood to another, and it kind of like rocked my world and was traumatizing to me. And so this shift in who I was as a person changed when I was 9 years old. And like I said, it was an incident, but I didn't. You're 9 years old. You're not thinking of things like that. But when I take every step and I just put my life in rewind and I look back and I say, how did this all happen? How did I become this guy who's always reaching and always trying and everything else like that? And it goes back to that. It really does. And I can see the through line of it. And I am so grateful for the life that I have. And I grew up with a father who was the greatest man I'll know, the greatest man I'll ever know, who was big message to me was gratitude. And he was amazing. He was grateful for everything. He woke up happy, went to bed happy, was very funny, and just an amazing father. So I'm always trying to think about things that I could do. In this chapter of my life, I want to mentor more. I want to work more. That's the great thing about having a production company is I work with a lot of young people, and we've seen a lot of young people go from runner to producer and executive producer. Some of them go on the other side to become a network buyer who used to work for us. We've been doing it for 23 years. And in the unscripted business, we're one of the older companies. And I get so much joy from that. I realize that so much of my joy during the course of the day is usually when I'm involved in some mentoring, working with, and so I consider this chapter kind of a new chapter in my life. I'm still continuing to make shows and everything like that, but I really wanted to do that. Further to that, all the proceeds from the book are going to the Reach Foundation, which I set up a few weeks ago. And the Reach Foundation is a charitable organization that donates money to a number of charities. All of those charities lift people up in some way so that they can reach in their own lives. And so when you're buying the book, you're doing a good thing. You're giving money to charity, which is good. But you're also getting some really good stories. But I did it because, like I said, and the other thing, and sorry for this, but not to leave my mom out, because one of the things I believe in is that it's much easier to reach when you're reaching from a strong foundation. And that's so important in anything that you do. And for me, it was my parents. And I had great parents, and they were supportive in spite of their crazy youngest child. And that goes a long way. Now, I was blessed with great parents. Not everybody has that. But that doesn't mean you can't build your foundation based on something else, whether it's friends, whether it's siblings or whatever. But it is much easier. That I talk about, the if you're standing on a sturdy table and you're reaching for something, it's much easier to reach. When you're standing on a wobbly table, because it's much harder to do that. And so that's, it's not impossible. It's just harder.
Yeah, yeah. Again, the book, the title is Reach. Arthur Smith. You find it at Amazon, everywhere else. Books are sold. There are a bunch of great stories in here. We won't tell them all, as you say. You want to leave some for the folks. But going to a basketball game with Magic Johnson in a very, very unique. Looking for a very unique ask. Again, I won't spoil the ask here. That's a great story. All sorts of stuff. There was one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, because again, it gets kind of to the business of Hollywood and where things are in this incredibly diverse, fractured media landscape. There was one meeting, and it's a really short part of your book, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much here. Okay. But there's this moment where you're taking over at you're I guess starting Fox Sports, the Fox Sports Net, and talking about how to kind of capture the audience. And Rupert Murdoch, who obviously is head of Fox and owns newspapers and media companies, news organizations, is talking about the importance of football as a singular thing that people will come to. I mean, I'm fascinated to get your perspective on this as somebody who has kind of, again, lived through this huge evolution and whose beginning was in sports, really. I mean, you're a sports guy first, and we have seen the landscape fracture into a billion different channels, and yet there are still the NFL. There's the Olympics. Even there's Major League Baseball, NBA, whatever, but you have these big focal points. Mm-hmm. Is that the future of a successful network media company, or are those two starting to fracture in ways that people didn't quite expect?
Sports is in a whole other category, and football, for that matter, is in a whole other category. So Rupert had tremendous foresight. And even way back in the 90s, when he acquired the rights to the NFL and overbid, in quotations, because he didn't really. He outbid CBS by $300 or $400 million. Everybody thought he was crazy and was going to lose money. As it turned out, he made a ton of money because the asset value of his stations, the Fox stations, grew tremendously, and he built the Fox network on the back of that. So that was brilliant. But he also said that in a day and age, somewhere down the road, there will be 500 channels, there will be all this, and football will still have the same audience. And he's right. The Super Bowl this year was the second or third highest rated Super Bowl of all time, and in spite of all this fragmentation, it cuts through. And part of it is the live, part of it is still, people are longing for that gathering together, and sports provides that. And I think every broadcast network has to be in live sports to a degree. And most of them are in football. Let's think about it. Yeah. I mean, CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, they all have football.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. The highest rated show on network television every year is Sunday Night Football. It's interesting. I think that some of this you can't just create and say, oh, we're going to do everything live and it's going to work. And but there are certain things that I know you want to build a show on network television that creates buzz, that people are talking about, that people watch, on that night. And certain shows can do that. And I believe that's where they need to focus, that you create programming that is so good that it becomes a week-to-week watch, because that's still the business that you're in. And it's difficult. It's extremely difficult, because we've all become network programmers. We program what we want to watch. We sit there, when I was little, I would go through the TV guide, when I'd get it at the beginning of the week, and I would chart out what I was going to watch. And it was like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to watch this if it's on that time? Or what? And I had to make tough decisions. And in spite of my, spreadsheets and everything else like that, And then thankfully, the greatest gift my wife has ever gotten me in 35 years of marriage was TiVo. It was the best gift I ever got for like a TV holic. Yes, I'm Arthur Smith and I'm a TV holic. And so, that was the greatest gift she gave me. But I think now with streaming and binging and programming being available, we all program our own networks. So it's a tough battle for the networks. It's a tough battle, but I still believe that there's, you just have to work harder at it, and you have to think about things that register and that things that are so good that you wait week to week. I know there's certain shows on television, even though they're on streamers, they don't release them right away. I'm a big fan of Succession. I watched it every Sunday as soon as I could. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I didn't watch it exactly when it was on, but I almost watched it was live. So if that can happen there, and I know it happens on other network programming, but it can still happen, and it's a harder game. And right now I think there is a recalibration of the industry going on. There's a lot of things going on that are shaking up our industry, not the least the writer's strike, which is in the middle of. There was a recalibration going on before the writer's strike was going on. So there's going to be some shifting and some changing, but you have to think about what really registers. And much in the same way that, like, when we're thinking of selling something to a streamer, it's a different type of thing than when we're selling something to a broadcast network. To me, when I'm selling something to a streamer, I'm thinking about, can they generate heat? Can they generate subscribers where people will actually love this so much that it helps their subscription? I'm thinking less about ratings, and they're not the same thing, because what you watch and what you pay for are different things. It's kind of like the old days when HBO first started. HBO, it wasn't TV, it was HBO. Remember that slogan? So, they had things on there that were so good that people were willing to pay whatever it was, whatever the monthly fee was. And that included, Mike. They had to deal with Mike Tyson. They had, the Larry Sanders Show with Gary Shandling and Dream On and The Sopranos and 6 Feet Under, and they were such great content that people, were willing to pay. And it's a higher bar, and it's a different standard. And sometimes if you have a really passionate audience about show, even though the numbers aren't that big from a broadcast network, you can sell it to a streamer because that audience will just go.
Sure.
And so it's in the sales mentality and in the programming mentality, you have to think about who are our viewers, or who are our subscribers, and how do we get to them? And it's quite interesting. And I've been around long enough to, as you've quickly pointed out, how old I am. No, as I've been around. No, I'm all good. Not really. I've been around long enough that I've seen it, and it's been very interesting to me, because I remember when we only had a few channels and they were black and white, and I remember color TV. Man, do I sound old! I sound old.
Well, if you want to be a mentor, you're gonna sound a little older when you're telling folks how to get. No, you mentioned the writer strike. I wanted to talk about this just a little bit, because I've talked to a lot of writers and how they feel about things. I'm curious. You say there's a kind of a paradigm shift right now in the middle of, what's happening with that. Are you guys expecting more series orders? I mean, I'm curious from how that impacts your end of the business.
For us, honestly, it's business as usual. We're always developing. We're always pitching, and I don't believe in pitching too often, because I don't think it's realistic to walk into a network office if you've been in there the day before saying, this is the greatest idea. So you can only claim that every so often. Maybe once a week, but not every day. No, I'm kidding. So, I mean, so for us, it's business as usual. Like I said, we're always developing and always pitching and everything else like that. I haven't seen like a rush of business because of the writer's strike. And I really want this thing to get solved as fast as possible. I don't like what it's doing to, our business. I just wish that, and I know there's some win-win deal that's happened. Clearly, things have changed for the writers, and I I get it. I understand, what's happened with smaller orders, which I'm sure you've covered in your podcast, smaller orders and lack of back end and all those things that weren't issues before, but that are now real issues now. And people are making less, and that has to be fixed. It has to be straightened out. And I know the studios are going through a difficult time, and they have to get their act together. And yes, there's pressures on costs, and they have to get their act together. So at some point this will happen. But listen, the truth of the matter is if you're an unscripted producer, you're running a production company, so what? You pick up an extra show. So in the scheme of things, you may get one less order down the road. I just really want the business to be back together and have the normal flow of things. And I know it will be someday. I just hope it's soon.
Yeah. I mean, I think the last 20 some years have shown that there's no reason that reality, quotation, reality, alternative, whatever, can't coexist with scripted. I mean, that seems to be working out, especially with the explosion of channels and networks. I mean, you touched on this very briefly, but I am again very curious about this new change and dynamic in terms of the new distribution models as much as anything else. Because when you're making a show on network TV where one episode comes out a week and it's a competition style show or whatever, it's very different than something like The Floor's Lava, which my kids love. Kids love Floor's Lava. They're watching it all the time, but they watch it out of order. It doesn't matter to them. They'll watch this episode or that episode. How does that change how you are thinking when you pitch it or when you produce it or elsewhere? Or are you just like, all right, this is the show. Let's just do it this way?
No, we're thinking very carefully about once again, it comes back to the audience, which is ultimately what's best for their business or subscribers. So no, everything is, when we develop a show, we really sit down and think about who it's right for, and you're tailoring your shows to the audience, so it's very much in our thinking. And sometimes you develop a show that's only works for one network or one platform because of who they are or what point they are in their history. So listen, we're constantly talking to them about what's working, and we know what's working to a degree. And you know what I'm getting at. And
there's a smile there. No, do you guys get frustrated by the lack of information, data, whatever? Do you wish you had that whole tranche to really sift through and be like, this is what's working, this isn't?
Well, more information is better, obviously, and it is getting better. I mean, when we first started doing things for some of the streamers, and I won't mention which ones, but it was harder to get information. It was harder to understand the algorithms that they were working with. But now they're pretty good. We do get weekly, monthly reports and stuff like that, and you get a pretty good sense of it. I'm laughing because I know it's a common thing that comes up. So because there was a period of time when it was like your show's not doing. What does that mean? And so, but I think that's more years ago than what's happening right now. But like I said, sometimes you have something that only works at one place, and I'm okay with that if it's the right show. Like a lot of times producers, well, I'm not going to develop this because it could only work at one place. I go, well, if it's the right thing, then you have a better chance of selling it. If it's a great idea for one place, it may be better chance of selling it than a good idea that works for a number of places. And I believe good ideas don't sell. I have this saying that I say around the office, and just is to make a point, I say good ideas don't sell, and great shows have a hard time selling. It's hard to sell shows. Very, very difficult. So unless you're walking into that pitch or getting on that Zoom, which we do more frequently than I like, because I'd rather pitch in person. But unless you're, like I said, doing your pitch with, oh my God, this is in my bones, this is so exciting, I'm so passionate about it. Unless you have that feeling, you should not be pitching the show. That's and by the way, even when you have that, it's hard to sell a show. Just is. The big thing with streaming right now, and you can see it, is, and they know it, and this is not news, but the ARCed shows work a lot better on streaming than the standalones. They just do.
Mm-hmm.
Not counting Floor is Lava, which was fun to do, and we're proud of it, and had a few seasons, and kids watch it again, and they watch them out of order, and that works because of who the audience is. It's a family audience. But most of the stuff that works on Netflix, The Love is Blind and things like that, are things that are arced because it's the same bingey kind of thing. It gets you to watch one and then another because it's an arced show. That's not news, but you can see how that developed over time. Netflix, even there are, things like Selling Sunset. That's an arc show. But it's evolved, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the Netflix is all about, and others are about completion. It's not just about did you watch the show, or did you watch the entire series? Did you get to the end of the series? And you have to sub something that teases well or that hooks you from one episode to another, and it's not surprising. And that the shows that are working the best on Netflix are things that are arced, and that's where their focus is.
All right, that was pretty much everything I wanted to ask. That was everything I wanted to touch on here. But I always like to close these interviews by asking if there's anything I should have asked, if there's anything you think folks should know, either about your book or the state of the industry. I mean, whatever I failed to ask that you think folks should know. What was that?
We covered a lot of ground, and I rambled a lot, and I think we got most of it. I hope that the future of television for me, or the future of content, is networks taking risks. That to me is the best thing. I believe we find our best hits, or the biggest surprises, or the most successful franchises often come when we take chances. And there's a tendency to do things that are derivative, or to tendency to do copycat shows. And my big push is always take a risk, take a chance. That's what Hell's Kitchen was. That's what Ninja Warrior was. That's what Masked Singer was. But that's what Seinfeld was. That was All in the Family. And so we see this pattern of these breakthrough shows that were all big risks, but every so often people get conservative and or people get nervous. And I just hope that our industry continues to take chances. That's what I think the audience wants. I think the audience wants a fresh point of view. The other thing, as it relates to my book, is that listen, there is a collection of stories that are in there. Magic Johnson, you brought up, and there's a story with Paul Allen, and A Crazy Night with Marlon Brando. That's nuts, and what Dwayne Johnson is really like, and what Gordon Ramsay is really like, and Simon Cowell, and all these great people, and some great everyday people who aren't famous that are in the book, but I'm really hoping the book inspires people. It's really like I chose the stories not because these are my biggest hits or these are my funniest stories, but they're within each of them there was a message, and I'm really hoping it inspires people to take chances and does some good in the world. But thank you for the time. It's been amazing.
Absolutely. Again, the name of the book is Reach: Hard Lessons and Learn Truths from a Lifetime in Television. I've been speaking to Arthur Smith, who again just has a really interesting and varied career throughout all sorts of types of TV, eras of. I mean, I learned a lot reading the book, which is the nicest thing I can say about any book that I read. Is if I learn something, I feel like I've come out ahead of the game here. So it's a fun read, available at Amazon now, and you're doing good. Again, you're helping a charity when you buy a copy. Proceeds going right back into the community. So that is great. Arthur, thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sonny.
All right. My name is Sonny Bunch. I'm the culture editor at The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood, and I will see you again next week.
The Bulwark podcast focuses on political analysis and reporting without partisan loyalties.
Real sense of deja vu sprinkled on our PTSD. So things are going well, I guess.
Every Monday through Friday, Charlie Sykes speaks with guests about the latest stories from inside Washington and around the world.
You document in a very compelling way all of the positive things that have come out of this, but it also feels like we have this massive hangover.
No shouting or grandstanding. Principles over partisanship. The Bulwark Podcast, wherever you listen.
Movies, TV shows, books, podcasts, and more. It's What Women Binge with Melissa Joan Hart and her friend Amanda Lee.
If I'm going to be an actress one day, which I don't think I will, I want to be on
You want to be?
Doesn't everybody want to be at some point?
I don't know. Really?
Says the girl who's done it her whole life. But I would want to be on one of those shows where you get to keep the wardrobe.
Well, you have to steal the wardrobe. Let's be clear about this. Advantage of my Motorola's and my free Disney entrance and tour guides. Those are my perky things.
What Women Binge, wherever you listen.